This channel is for women who are doing fine, but feel quietly lost. I want to begin with a question that may feel more dangerous than it sounds. Why is it that a man can meet dozens of women across the years, beautiful women, intelligent women, kind women, impressive women, and still remember only one as if she had left something of herself beneath his skin? Not always the woman everyone noticed first. Not always the woman with the brightest smile, the sharpest wit, or the most polished life. Sometimes the one he never truly forgets is the woman no one could fully explain. And that should disturb us a little. Because it means what stays in a man's heart is not always what the world tells us matters. It is not always youth. Not always beauty. Not always ease. Not always the woman who tried hardest. Not always the one who gave the most. Not always the one who made herself endlessly available, endlessly understanding, endlessly desirable. Sometimes the woman he remembers for the rest of his life is the one who stirred something in him that had been sleeping for years. A feeling he could not name. A silence that felt fuller than conversation. A presence that made his usual life suddenly seem thin. That is the mystery. And if I am honest, that mystery matters more to me now than it did when I was younger. Because there comes a certain age when I stop being interested in shallow answers. I stop wanting to hear that love is just about chemistry, timing, or being attractive enough to hold attention. I stop believing that if I say the right things, wear the right softness, master the right feminine gestures, and make myself easy enough to love, I will become unforgettable. No. By now, I know better. I know a woman can be deeply loved on the surface and still remain unseen. I know she can be admired and still feel emotionally starving. I know she can be the wife, the mother, the professional, the dependable one, the calm one, the strong one, and still lie awake at night with the quiet ache of someone who has disappeared inside her own life. And maybe that is why this conversation matters so much. Because many women are not falling apart. They are functioning. They are meeting deadlines, answering texts, buying groceries, paying bills, remembering birthdays, showing up to work, checking on aging parents, keeping marriages civilized, staying polite in rooms where their soul has already gone silent. They are doing fine. And yet somewhere beneath all that competence is a strange and terrible loneliness. Not the loneliness of being abandoned. The loneliness of being present in my own life, but not fully alive inside it. The loneliness of being needed, but not deeply felt. The loneliness of being surrounded, but not reached. That is the emotional terrain I care about here. Not performance. Not manipulation. Not the kind of advice that tells women to become smaller, sweeter, shinier, or more strategic in order to be chosen. I am not interested in helping women become more pleasing. I am interested in something more unsettling and more true. I want to understand what makes a woman unforgettable in a way that does not depend on performance at all. What is it about certain women that enters a man's memory like a private storm? What is it about her energy, her way of being, her way of inhabiting herself, that makes him feel he has found something he will not easily find again? Because when a man remembers one woman for life, he is not usually remembering a list of her qualities. He is remembering who he became in her presence. He is remembering what it felt like to sit across from someone and feel, perhaps for the first time in years, that he did not need to perform strength every second. He is remembering what it felt like to be looked at and not merely assessed. To be listened to and not managed. To be near a woman whose inner life was not empty, not frantic, not needy, not trying to prove, but deeply, quietly alive. And that kind of woman is rare. Rare not because she is perfect. Rare because in a loud world, she has not lost contact with what is real. I think that is what so many women are aching for now, especially in the middle years of life. Not reinvention as spectacle. Not empowerment as noise. Not another polished identity to wear over old exhaustion. I think many women want something far more intimate than that. I think they want to come home to themselves. To the self beneath the roles. To the self beneath the endless competence. To the self that still longs, still feels, still wants something truer than applause. And from that place, love looks different too. Because the question begins to change. I stop asking, how do I make him choose me? And I begin asking, what kind of woman creates an emotional reality so rare that he cannot forget her, even if he tries? That is a harder question. A deeper one. And it does not flatter me with easy answers. Because the truth may be that unforgettable feminine energy has very little to do with trying harder. It may have everything to do with becoming more deeply inhabited, more present, more emotionally honest, more mysterious because my inner life is real, more whole because I am no longer asking love to rescue me from myself. More grounded because I have stopped abandoning my truth just to keep the peace. There is something almost shocking about this once I really let it in. A woman does not become unforgettable by becoming more consumable. She becomes unforgettable when her presence touches something in a man that the rest of his life cannot reach. And the frightening part is that many women have spent years trying to be memorable in all the wrong ways. By overgiving. By over-explaining, by over-performing, by staying easy, agreeable, available, resilient, undemanding. By becoming so skilled at love on the surface that no one notices the life draining out beneath it. But that woman, the one who is all performance and no center, is not the one who changes a man. The woman who changes him is the one who has depth. The one whose warmth is real. The one whose silence is not emptiness, but substance. The one who does not beg for attention because her energy already carries meaning. The one who makes him feel, in ways he may never fully articulate, that being near her is not just attractive. It is disarming. It is calming. It is unsettling. It is alive. And perhaps that is why some men remember only one woman forever. Not because she dazzled him the most, but because she reached the part of him that no one else had touched without trying to control. That is what we are going to explore in this video. Not empty self-help. Not tired dating advice. Not the performance of feminine energy, but the deeper truths beneath it, the qualities that make a woman feel impossible to replace because she is no longer performing for love, but living from something deeper than fear. If that kind of conversation speaks to you, subscribe to the channel and stay with me. Your support helps this space keep going, and it gives me the energy to continue creating videos that speak to the women who carry so much, say so little, and still wonder if anyone can feel the life beneath their silence. Because what comes next may explain more than love. It may explain why so many women have been doing everything right and still feeling something essential missing. And once I see that clearly, I can never unsee it. Presence, the rare woman who makes a man feel fully met. There is a form of presence so rare that most people do not recognize its value until they have already lost it. I am not speaking about physical closeness. Not about sitting across from someone at a table, sharing a meal, nodding at the right moments, and technically participating in the exchange. Most people can do that. Most people have learned the choreography of attention well enough to appear engaged. They ask a question, smile softly, glance up, say I understand, and all the while their mind is already somewhere else, half in tomorrow, half in their phone, half in the story they are preparing to tell next. But to be truly present is something else entirely. It is to arrive with my full interior weight. To let the moment have me. To stop rehearsing, fixing, interpreting, and quietly defending myself long enough for another person to feel that I am not just near him. I am with him. That kind of presence is not dramatic, but it can alter a man more than anything dramatic ever does. Because many men live in a world where they are responded to, but not deeply received. They are listened to just enough to keep the conversation moving. They are appreciated for what they handle, what they provide, what they solve, what they endure. Even in intimacy, they can become accustomed to being translated too quickly. A sentence leaves their mouth, and before it has fully landed, someone is already reshaping it into advice, reaction, correction, or conclusion. Over time, this creates a particular hunger. Not always visible. Not always spoken. But present. The hunger to be in the company of a woman who does not immediately turn his inner life into a problem to solve or a performance to evaluate. A woman whose attention does not feel scattered. A woman who does not make him work so hard to be felt. I think of Daniel. Not because he is extraordinary, but because he is ordinary in the way many men are ordinary, reliable, self-contained, tired in places no one sees. He lives in Seattle, in a life that looks stable from the outside. He works hard. He returns calls. He keeps his word. He is the kind of man people describe as solid, which is often just another way of saying he has learned how to carry weight without making it visible. Men like that are rarely invited to lay anything down. One rainy evening, Daniel sits across from me in a quiet coffee shop not far from Elliott Bay. Nothing about the scene is remarkable. The windows are damp with weather. People pass outside in dark coats. The espresso machine hisses now and then. It is the kind of ordinary setting where unforgettable things sometimes happen precisely because no one expected them to. He begins by speaking the way men often do when they are not sure whether they want to be known. A little carefully. A little indirectly. He talks about work, a recent change at the office, the irritating politics of people who say one thing in meetings and another in hallways. The conversation could stay there. Surface level, intelligent, harmless. The kind of exchange that fills an hour and leaves no mark. But presence changes the temperature of a moment before words ever do. When he speaks, I do not rush to respond. I do not interrupt with my own similar story. I do not brighten the air too quickly because I am afraid of depth. I stay. I let his words arrive fully before I decide what they mean. I let there be enough silence after a sentence that he can hear himself too. And something in him notices. People always notice when they are not being hurried. That may be one of the most overlooked truths in human connection. We think people remember what we said. Sometimes they do. But more often, they remember whether there was room for them to exist inside the conversation without being pushed along, cleaned up, or emotionally processed before they were ready. Daniel shifts slowly. It is subtle. His shoulders lower a fraction. His voice loses some of its polished edge. He mentions, almost in passing, that when he was younger he thought his life would feel different by now. It is a sentence many people would step over. Too vague. Too tender. Too easy to miss. But presence catches what performance ignores. So I ask him what different meant to him then. Not in an interrogating way. Not because I am mining for vulnerability. I ask because I genuinely want to know what he has not said. That question opens something. He talks about his younger self in a way that surprises even him. About old ambitions that had nothing to do with money. About the kind of work he imagined would make him feel awake. About how strange it is to become successful in ways that still leave certain rooms inside me unlit. He laughs once while saying it, but the laugh is thin. The truth beneath it is not. This is where presence becomes unforgettable. Not when I say something brilliant. Not when I offer the perfect insight. But when I can remain there with him, without trying to rescue him from the discomfort of his own honesty. Most people are uncomfortable with unguarded moments. They rush to reassure. They rush to improve the mood. They rush to say something useful because helplessness makes them anxious. But deep presence is not anxious in that way. It understands that not every truth needs immediate repair. Some truths need witness first. And witness is one of the rarest gifts a woman can give a man. To witness is to say, with my attention, I am not afraid of your interior life. I am not afraid of what is unfinished in you. I am not afraid of your disappointment, your hesitation, your complexity, your tiredness, or the version of you that is less impressive than the world prefers. For many men, that is profoundly disarming. Because strength has often been their social language, but not necessarily their deepest self. Underneath competence, underneath steadiness, underneath the practiced habit of being useful, there is often a quieter life. A life of doubt, memory, pressure, tenderness, fear of failure, fear of irrelevance, grief they have not named, longing they have outgrown in public but not in private. A present woman reaches that quieter life. And she does it not by force, but by steadiness. This kind of presence matters outside emotionally charged conversations too. It matters in the smallest domestic moments, where the truth of a relationship often lives. In how I look at him when he enters the room at the end of the day. In whether I keep half listening while cleaning the counter, or whether I turn fully toward him for one real minute. In whether I sense the difference between his usual silence and the silence that means something is wrong. In whether I can sit next to him on a gray Seattle evening, the lamp on, the rest of the apartment quiet, and let that silence remain warm instead of strained. The woman who can do this becomes a place of relief. Not because she is passive. Not because she asks for nothing. But because her presence does not add to the noise already pressing against him. It does not crowd him with demands before he has even arrived. It does not make every conversation a test of emotional eloquence. It does not punish him for needing time to reach his own truth. There is deep feminine power in that. Especially now, when attention is so fractured that full presence feels almost sacred. And this presence is not only a gift I offer another person. It begins in the way I inhabit myself. If I am never with myself, if I live in constant distraction, constant self-correction, constant emotional postponement, then my attention will always be thin. I will hear him through the static of my own unprocessed life. So presence asks something of me too. It asks that I become a woman who can stay in the room of the moment without immediately fleeing into reaction. It asks that I let silence breathe. That I resist the modern habit of turning every emotional opening into instant interpretation. That I trust stillness enough to remain inside it. Daniel may not remember every word from that evening by the water. Years from now, he may not even remember the order in which things were said. But he will remember how it felt to sit across from a woman and realize he was not being skimmed. He was being met. And for a man who has spent much of his life being useful before being understood, that feeling can become almost impossible to replace. Emotional aliveness, when a woman stops abandoning her own feelings. There is a quiet kind of self-betrayal that does not look dramatic from the outside. No one sees it happen. No door slams. No one raises a voice. My life can still look composed, respectable, even beautiful in places. I can answer emails, keep appointments, prepare dinner, make conversation, remember birthdays, and move through the day with the face of a woman who is managing perfectly well. And yet somewhere beneath that surface, I may be leaving myself again and again in small, almost invisible ways. I leave myself when I say I am fine because the truth feels too inconvenient. I leave myself when something hurts and I immediately begin explaining it away. I leave myself when my body tightens around a no, but I offer a yes because I do not want to disturb the mood. I leave myself when I am lonely, tired, disappointed, or quietly angry, and I turn all of it into politeness so no one has to feel the weight of my interior world. This is what I mean by emotional abandonment. It is not always a grand wound. Sometimes it is a lifelong habit of stepping away from my own feelings before anyone else has the chance to do it first. And a woman can live this way for years without even realizing how much life has drained out of her. That is why emotional aliveness matters so deeply. Not because it makes me more expressive in some performative sense. Not because I become louder, more reactive, or more emotionally theatrical. But because a woman who has stopped abandoning her own feelings carries a different kind of energy into every room she enters. She is no longer split from herself. And that changes everything. I think many women have been trained into emotional self-abandonment so early that it begins to feel like maturity. It looks like composure. It sounds like reasonableness. It is praised as strength. The woman who does not make things difficult. The woman who keeps things moving. The woman who knows how to absorb disappointment without changing the atmosphere for everyone else. But there is a cost to being endlessly manageable. At first, the cost is hard to notice. Then one day I find myself in the middle of a life I built with tremendous discipline, and something inside me feels dim. Not broken. Dim as if I have become highly skilled at living without being fully inhabited. And men can feel that dimness, even when they do not have language for it. What reaches a man most deeply is not only beauty, not only warmth, not only the elegance of a woman's exterior life. It is aliveness. The feeling that she is genuinely there inside herself. That her smile rises from somewhere real. That her voice is connected to an inner current. That when she says yes, something in her actually means yes. That when she falls quiet, it is because she is listening inward, not disappearing. That kind of aliveness is unforgettable because it cannot be faked for very long. I think of Daniel again, in Seattle, where so much of life seems wrapped in grey light and private weather. There is a particular kind of evening there that makes everything feel more interior. Rain pressing softly against the windows. The city moving in muted reflections. The room warm but quiet, as if it is holding its breath. He is sitting with me over dinner, and I can sense before he says anything that something in him has tightened. Not enough for anyone else to notice. He is still polite. Still functioning. Still perfectly capable of moving through the evening without making a scene of himself. But I can feel the difference between his usual reserve and the kind that comes when someone has gone too long without exhaling. That sensitivity does not come from strategy. It comes from being in contact with myself. A woman who is emotionally alive notices things. Not because she is trying to decode everyone, but because when I stop numbing my own interior world, I become more attuned to the emotional reality in the room. The body reads what the mind has not yet said. The face catches what the mouth is still editing. A pause carries information. So does a tired laugh. So does the way someone reaches for a glass of water when they need a few more seconds before speaking. I ask him no dramatic question. I do not press. I only say, softly, that he feels far away tonight. And what matters is not only the sentence. It is that I am saying it from a place that is connected. I am not trying to manage his mood. I am not trying to look emotionally perceptive. I am simply telling the truth of what I can feel. This is the kind of feminine energy that reaches a man in a deeper place. Not because it performs intuition, but because it lives close enough to reality to sense what is there. Many women lose that closeness because they have spent so long overriding themselves. If I do not listen to my own fatigue, my own tension, my own flashes of sadness, my own quiet desires, eventually I stop trusting what I feel. And once that happens, my emotional life becomes thinner. I can still be kind, attractive, intelligent, accomplished. But something in me goes slightly numb. My reactions become more rehearsed. My delight becomes less spontaneous. My tenderness begins to feel managed. Even my beauty changes when I am no longer fully inside it. There is nothing more exhausting than being emotionally edited all the time. To remain alive, I have to let my feelings exist before I decide whether they are acceptable. I have to notice when I am disappointed instead of instantly calling myself ungrateful. I have to recognize resentment before it turns into coldness. I have to admit when I am moved by something small and lovely instead of brushing it off because it seems sentimental. I have to let life touch me. That may sound simple, but for many women it is radical. It means I allow myself to enjoy things without apologizing for them. The first sip of coffee on a cold morning. The sound of an old song that opens a room inside me I had forgotten. The sight of streetlights on wet pavement. The comfort of worn cotton sheets after a hard day. The smell of cedar, rosemary, sea air, rain. A book that leaves me quiet for an hour after closing it. A long walk near the water with no one asking anything of me. These are not decorative details. They are signs that I am still permeable to life. And permeability is part of emotional aliveness. A woman becomes magnetic when she is no longer sealed off from her own experience. She does not move through the world like a machine built for endurance. She responds. She receives. She feels. Her joy is not synthetic. Her sadness is not hidden so deeply that it curdles into distance. Her anger does not need to explode because she has learned how to hear it before it becomes poison. This changes intimacy too. Because when I stop abandoning my own feelings, I stop asking a relationship to carry the burden of emotions I refuse to acknowledge. I become more honest in gentler ways. I say I am tired before I become sharp. I say something hurt me before I grow cold. I say I need a quieter evening instead of smiling my way into resentment. And that honesty creates warmth, not less of it. Truth often softens a woman when she no longer has to spend so much energy suppressing it. Daniel feels this, I think, more than he could ever explain. Not simply that I notice him, but that I notice from a place of inner contact. He is not speaking to a woman who has vanished inside competence. He is sitting with a woman whose feelings are still alive enough to meet his. And that is rare. The woman a man remembers is often not the woman who seemed easiest. It is the woman who felt most alive. The one whose face changed when something mattered. The one whose silence was full, whose warmth was real, whose emotional life had movement in it. The one who had not abandoned herself so completely that there was no one left inside the beauty. That kind of aliveness does not shout. It glows. And once a man has sat in the presence of a woman who is truly alive to her own heart, ordinary connection begins to feel strangely empty by comparison. Mystery, the power of a woman who is not instantly knowable. There is a difference between being open and being immediately consumed. I think many women are taught to confuse the two. We are told that sincerity means full disclosure, that emotional maturity means explaining ourselves quickly and completely, that closeness is built by immediate access. So I answer the question in detail. I tell the full story too early. I reveal the wound before trust has earned the right to hold it. I make my interior world available all at once, as though being easily readable is the same thing as being deeply known. But it is not. Some of the most unforgettable women are not unforgettable because they hide themselves in some calculated way. They are unforgettable because there is still depth left to discover. Because even when they are warm, even when they are honest, even when they are emotionally present, they do not flatten themselves into something instantly understandable. That is mystery. Not games. Not coldness. Not manipulation. Not the performance of being elusive just to provoke desire. Real mystery is much quieter than that. It is the natural atmosphere of a woman whose inner life has not been turned inside out for approval. A woman who still belongs to herself. A woman who has rooms within her that are lived in, tended to, and not immediately opened just because someone is curious. I think this becomes especially important for women who have spent much of life being visible in all the wrong ways. Needed, explained, interpreted, accessed, leaned on, watched, expected. There comes a point when mystery is not distance. It is dignity. It is the refusal to let every private thing become public simply to make another person feel comfortable. It is the quiet knowledge that not all intimacy should be rushed. Daniel and I are still in Seattle, still moving through the same city with its rain-dark streets, its soft gray sky, its private interiors. There is something about Seattle that makes mystery feel native to the air. The harbor disappears into fog. Buildings hold light behind wet glass. People move through weather that makes even ordinary thoughts feel more inward. It is a city that understands what it means for something to be present without fully revealing itself. That is how a woman becomes unforgettable too. One evening, Daniel asks me a question that could have opened everything at once if I had let it. He asks what I thought my life would become when I was younger. It is the sort of question that invites confession. A doorway into old dreams, old heartbreaks, old disappointments, the private map of all the roads not taken. I could answer it fully. I could place my entire history on the table in the name of honesty. I could tell him all of it, the versions of myself I lost, the marriage I nearly mistook for peace, the years I spent being reliable instead of fully alive, the quieter griefs that do not announce themselves loudly enough for other people to notice. But I do not. Not because I am hiding. Not because I want power over him. I do not answer fully because the truth deserves timing. Some parts of me are not meant to be handed over at first touch. They are meant to be entered carefully, over time, in the presence of real steadiness. So I tell him only enough to be true. I say that when I was younger, I imagined a life with more beauty in it. Not luxury. Beauty. More inner spaciousness. More honesty. More mornings that felt like my own. Then I smile, not to deflect, but to let the rest remain where it belongs for now. Something changes in the air when I do that. Not distance. Attention. He leans in, not physically perhaps, but inwardly. He can feel there is more beneath the sentence, more beneath the smile, more beneath the life I have chosen to summarize for now. That feeling does something to a man when it is real. It tells him he is not standing before a surface. He is standing before depth. And depth has gravity. A woman becomes instantly forgettable when she reveals herself like a brochure. Clear, accessible, efficiently explained, no hidden rooms, no private weather, no unfolding. But a woman whose interior life has layers cannot be consumed that quickly. Even her silences have texture. Even what she chooses not to explain seems to belong to something real. I think this matters more than ever because so much of modern life pressures women to become legible. To narrate everything. To account for every feeling. To expose every part of the self in order to prove openness. But there is a kind of overexposure that is not intimacy at all. It is anxiety dressed as honesty. It is the fear that if I am not immediately transparent, I will be misunderstood, left behind, or forgotten. And yet the opposite is often true. What is instantly accessible is often too easily skimmed. What unfolds slowly enters memory differently. Mystery protects the soul from becoming casual material. It says that my life is not a document to be reviewed in one sitting. It says there is rhythm to revelation. It says I can be warm without being immediately entered. I can be interested without becoming available in every way at once. I can let a man feel my sincerity without giving him the keys to every private room inside me before he has shown me how he handles tenderness. This is not withholding affection. It is protecting meaning. I think women often lose their mystery when they become too eager to prove they are safe to love. They explain the pain too quickly. They disclose the family history too soon. They offer every emotional blueprint in the hope that clarity will create closeness. But closeness created by speed is often fragile. It has information, but not yet intimacy. True intimacy is built when revelation has somewhere worthy to land. A mysterious woman understands this in her body. She does not rush her own unfolding. She does not panic at pauses. She does not treat every unanswered question as a demand. She knows that love deepens not only through what is shared, but through what is allowed to ripen before it is spoken. This mystery does not live only in conversations. It lives in a woman's life itself. In what she tends privately. In the notebook by her bed. In the walk she takes alone along the waterfront. In the books on her nightstand with folded pages and marginal notes no one sees. In the way she disappears for an hour on a Sunday morning and returns calmer, fuller, less available to the world's urgency. In the fact that there are parts of her life that do not exist for display, explanation, or consumption. Daniel feels this when he is with me, though he may not name it that way. He senses that I am not empty just because I am quiet. He senses that my pauses are not gaps, but depth. He senses that my tenderness does not come from hunger. It comes from substance. And substance is mysterious by nature. The women men remember are often not the women who revealed everything first. They are the women who remained discoverable. The women whose emotional world did not end where the first conversation ended. The women whose inner life was large enough to keep unfolding. The women who could sit across from a man in a dim Seattle room, rain moving against the windows, and somehow make him feel that he was near something gentle, intelligent, and not yet fully reached. That feeling stays with him. Because the male heart, even when it pretends otherwise, is often deeply moved by what it cannot fully possess. Not because it wants conquest, but because real love longs for a person, not a product. It longs for a soul that still has atmosphere. A woman whose depths ask not for speed, but for reverence. And once a man has felt that kind of mystery in a woman, he does not forget her easily. Not because she made herself difficult, but because she remained whole enough not to become instantly known. Authenticity. When I stop performing to be chosen. There is a certain kind of loneliness that only appears when I am loved for a version of myself that is not entirely real. From the outside, this kind of life can look successful. I can seem graceful, emotionally intelligent, warm, capable, attractive, easy to be with. I can know exactly how to soften a difficult moment, how to answer in the right tone, how to smile when I am tired, how to remain composed when something in me has already started to close. I can become so skilled at being the kind of woman others are comfortable loving that almost no one notices the distance growing between my outer self and my inner life. But I notice. I notice it in the fatigue that appears after even lovely evenings. I notice it in the strange emptiness that can follow closeness. I notice it when a man looks at me with affection and some quiet part of me thinks, yes, but you are loving the version of me that knows how to make this easy. You are loving the woman who edits herself before she arrives. That is the danger of performance. It can bring admiration. It can create attraction. It can even sustain a relationship for a while. But it cannot create the kind of intimacy that leaves a man deeply changed, because real intimacy does not grow where truth is constantly being managed. Authenticity begins where performance ends. And for many women, that ending is not dramatic. It is not a rebellion. It is more like exhaustion finally becoming honest. The moment I realize I can no longer keep offering polished substitutes for what I actually feel. The moment I understand that being chosen means very little if I had to abandon my own reality in order to be acceptable enough to keep. I think this becomes especially sharp in midlife. By then, many women have worn enough masks to know the cost of each one. The calm woman who never complains. The desirable woman who never lets her tiredness show. The strong woman who does not ask for comfort. The agreeable woman who does not let disappointment stay visible too long. The understanding woman who can explain away a man's inconsistency before he even has to. These masks are often rewarded. They are praised as maturity, femininity, resilience, emotional sophistication. But many of them are simply elegant forms of self-erasure. And self-erasure has a way of hollowing love from the inside. Daniel and I are still in Seattle, still moving through the same damp evenings, the same grey light, the same inward atmosphere the city seems to hold all year long. There is something about Seattle that makes pretense harder to maintain for long. The weather slows everything down. Silence becomes more noticeable. Even beauty feels less performative there. It is not a city that flatters people into brightness. It asks them to be real or remain hidden. One evening, Daniel asks me a simple question, the kind people ask every day without realizing how dangerous it can be. He asks how I have really been. Not how work is. Not whether I have been busy. Not whether my week was good. He asks in a tone that makes the room feel quieter around the words, as if he is asking for something beneath the social answer. And for a second, I can feel the old reflex rise in me. The polished response. The efficient one. The one that protects dignity, keeps the mood intact, and asks nothing difficult of the moment. I could say I am fine, just a little tired. I could say it has been a lot lately, but nothing I cannot handle. I could offer the version of myself that has learned how to stay appealing by staying composed. But authenticity begins in that exact second, the second I feel the urge to perform and do not obey it. So I tell him the truth. Not all of it. Authenticity is not emotional dumping. It is not turning every honest moment into an unfiltered flood. But I tell him the living truth. I tell him that I have been more tired than I let most people see. That there are days when I move through everything beautifully and still feel as though I have left myself behind somewhere in the process. That I am not falling apart, but I am no longer interested in pretending that strength means never feeling the weight of my own life. He says nothing immediately. And that silence matters, because it is the kind of silence that receives rather than retreats. This is what authenticity does. It changes the room. It removes the polished glass between two people. It allows something human to breathe where performance would have kept everything technically pleasant and emotionally untouched. I think many women fear authenticity not because they do not value truth, but because they understand the risk of it too well. To be real is to become visible. And visibility has often come with consequences. Maybe I was told I was too sensitive. Maybe honesty was treated as conflict. Maybe vulnerability was met with impatience, or disappointment, or subtle withdrawal. Maybe I learned that being easy to love was safer than being fully known. So I adapted. Most women do. We learn how to stay warm without becoming inconvenient. How to reveal pain in softened language. How to ask for very little. How to make our emotions legible but never too disruptive. How to package our truth in ways that will not threaten the room. But over time, this adaptation begins to cost more than it protects. Because the deepest fear is not always rejection. Sometimes it is the possibility that I will spend years being loved while never once being fully met. That fear changes a woman. It makes her crave a different kind of connection. Not louder. Not more dramatic. More honest. Authenticity is beautiful because it is alive. It allows my face to say what my body already knows. It lets warmth be warmth and sadness be sadness. It lets disappointment remain visible long enough to be respected. It stops turning every feeling into a negotiation with likability. And men feel this with extraordinary precision. They may not always name it well, but they know when a woman is real. They know when her kindness is connected to her center and when it is a habit built from self-suppression. They know when her laughter comes easily and when it is being used to soften what should have been spoken plainly. They know when they are sitting with a woman and when they are sitting with a beautifully maintained persona. A man may admire the persona. He may even be drawn to it. But what he remembers is the woman who let him encounter something unedited and true. Not reckless truth. Not weaponized emotion. Not chaos in the name of honesty. Real authenticity is steadier than that. It does not throw everything into the room. It does not demand that every feeling be centered. It simply refuses to keep replacing reality with performance. That refusal has enormous dignity in it. And it gives a man permission to do something he may not have done in years, lower his own performance too. There is something profoundly intimate about being with a woman who no longer needs to appear invulnerable in order to remain desirable. It relaxes the whole field between two people. It says that love does not have to be built on maintenance. That I do not need to keep acting stronger, easier, smoother, shinier than I really am. That I can bring the woman who is thoughtful, weary, perceptive, longing, uncertain, tender, self-aware, and still becoming, and trust that truth more than image. Daniel feels this shift, I think, not as an idea but as relief. Because the moment I stop performing, he no longer has to perform quite so hard either. He can answer more honestly. He can be less polished. He can let his own complicated interior life come forward without having to translate it into something impressive first. This is why authenticity is not only morally beautiful. It is magnetic. The woman who is unforgettable is rarely the woman who maintained the most flawless image. She is the woman whose truth had warmth in it. The woman who did not use honesty to create drama, but to create reality. The woman who could say, in her own way, this is where I actually am. This is what is true for me. This is the face of my life when I stop arranging it for approval. That kind of woman cannot be easily replaced, because she does not leave a man with the memory of being entertained. She leaves him with the memory of being with someone real. And in a world full of performance, reality has a power that goes far deeper than charm. Receptivity, knowing when to give, when to pause, and when to let him come closer. There is a kind of woman the world admires very easily. She is competent. She is composed. She anticipates needs before anyone has to ask. She makes the reservation, remembers the detail, carries the schedule, notices the emotional weather in the room, fixes what is faltering, and somehow manages to do all of this while still appearing graceful. She is the woman others depend on because she has trained herself to become almost frictionless in the act of carrying life. I know this woman well. I know how natural it can feel to become her. Not because I was born wanting to do everything alone, but because somewhere along the way, capability began to feel safer than need. It felt cleaner to handle things myself than to risk disappointment. It felt more dignified to stay ahead of the problem than to admit I needed help. It felt more adult to absorb the strain quietly than to let someone see where I was stretched thin. And yet this same strength, when it hardens into habit, can quietly starve intimacy. Because there comes a point where giving is no longer generosity. It becomes control disguised as responsibility. It becomes a way of ensuring that nothing vulnerable is ever placed in another person's hands. If I do everything, anticipate everything, soothe everything, organize everything, then I never have to stand in the more frightening place, the place where I let someone's care matter to me. That is why receptivity is so much deeper than people think. It is not passivity. It is not helplessness. It is not femininity performed as weakness so that a man can feel large. Real receptivity is far more dignified than that. It is the ability to remain open enough for love to move toward me. The ability to stop over-functioning long enough for another person to enter the moment with me. The ability to receive care without feeling reduced by it. This is difficult for many women, especially women who have built strong lives. Women who work, lead, earn, decide, recover, endure. Women who have survived disappointment by becoming exceptionally self-reliant. Women who have learned to move through loneliness by becoming useful. Women who know exactly how to keep things going, even when no one notices the cost. And because of that, many of us confuse exhaustion with maturity. We think love is proven by how much we can carry without asking. We think devotion means staying one step ahead of our own needs. We think strength means never letting anyone feel too necessary. But relationships do not deepen only through what I give. They also deepen through what I allow. Daniel and I are still in Seattle, still inside the same weathered city where the evenings seem to gather people inward. There is something about that landscape, the rain-slick streets, the muted sky, the ferry lights moving through the dark water that makes emotional truth harder to avoid. Maybe because the city itself feels like a lesson in restraint. Nothing there begs for attention. And yet everything has depth if I stay long enough to feel it. One evening, after a long week, Daniel offers to cook. It is such a small thing. Ordinary, even forgettable, if I let it be. He notices I am tired in the way that capable women often hide well, still functional, still warm, still holding the evening together, but thinner at the edges than I want to admit. He says he can take care of dinner. The old reflex rises in me instantly. I could say no. I could smile and tell him I already have it handled. I could insist it is easier if I just do it myself. I could preserve the familiar identity, the woman who needs nothing, the woman who is grateful but not reachable, the woman who remains admirable by staying unburdening. But what would that really preserve? Not dignity. Distance. So instead, I let the moment stand. I let him cook. I let the kitchen become his for an hour. I let myself sit near the window with the rain moving softly against the glass and do nothing useful. I let there be a woman in the room who is not managing the whole evening into place. And what surprises me is not only the relief of it. It is what it gives him. He changes when he is allowed to matter. Not in some grand, theatrical way. More quietly than that. He becomes more grounded. More present. More at ease inside his own masculine steadiness. There is a kind of joy men sometimes feel when their care lands somewhere real, when it is not waved away, corrected, or quietly redone the moment they turn their back. To contribute meaningfully to a woman's life is often one of the ways a man comes alive in love. But if I never allow that, then I may spend years asking why he feels distant while leaving him almost no place to arrive. This is one of the deepest paradoxes in intimacy. The more I overgive, the less space there may be for relationship itself. I can become so efficient, so anticipatory, so self-contained that love never has room to breathe between us. I become the manager of connection, not the receiver of it. And that dynamic does something subtle but painful over time. It leaves me tired. It leaves him less engaged. It drains polarity. It turns closeness into a system of tasks instead of an exchange of presence. Receptivity interrupts that pattern. It asks me to notice where I am over-functioning not because I am generous, but because I am afraid. Afraid that if I do not hold everything, something will be dropped. Afraid that if I let someone close enough to help, I will have to feel my dependence. Afraid that receiving creates obligation. Afraid that wanting comfort makes me weak. Afraid that being met will uncover how long I have been carrying too much alone. Those fears are not small. For many women, they come from lived experience. Times we reached and no one came. Times help was offered carelessly. Times vulnerability was mishandled. Times we had to become stronger than we wanted to be simply because life required it. So yes, Self-reliance can become a form of emotional armor. But armor, even elegant armor, still blocks touch. Receptivity does not demand that I become naive. It does not ask me to hand my life over to someone unworthy. It asks for something more mature than that: discernment without closure, strength without rigidity, openness without self-erasure. It means I can say, yes, I would love that, and mean it. It means I can let him choose the restaurant without turning the evening into a quiet test of whether he gets it right. It means I can ask him to come with me when I am carrying something heavy emotionally, instead of translating all my need into competence and then resenting him for not sensing the invisible labor. It means I can admit, on certain nights, that I do not want to be the one who keeps everything moving. There is such tenderness in a woman who can do this without apology. Not because she becomes smaller, but because she becomes reachable. That reachability changes a man. He no longer feels merely adjacent to my life. He feels welcomed into it. He feels that his steadiness can touch something real. He feels that care is not only something he is supposed to offer, but something that can actually land. And people are transformed by where they are allowed to matter. This also includes knowing when to pause. Receptivity is not endless giving in softer clothing. It is rhythm. It is understanding that if I pour constantly, I eventually lose contact with the center from which love is meant to come. I have to know when to hold something back, not as punishment, not as manipulation, but as self-preservation. I have to know when I am giving from fullness and when I am giving from fear. I have to know when my kindness is sincere and when it has become an anxious attempt to keep closeness alive. That pause is sacred. Because in the pause, truth returns. I can feel whether I actually want to do this. Whether I am offering from generosity or proving my worth through usefulness. Whether I am creating intimacy or merely preventing discomfort. Whether I am leaving any room at all for Daniel to step toward me. Sometimes love grows not because I gave more, but because I stopped filling every silence with effort. And that is the quiet dignity of receptivity. It lets relationship become mutual again. It lets a woman remain strong without becoming sealed. It lets a man offer himself without being turned into either a savior or a spectator. Daniel may not name it this way, but I think he feels the difference when I stop doing everything for the moment before it has even happened. He feels it when I let his care count. He feels it when I do not reduce his effort by insisting I never needed it. He feels it when I allow softness to exist in me without rushing to cover it back over with competence. This is what makes a woman unforgettable. Not that she gave endlessly, but that she knew how to open just enough for love to move toward her, and how to pause just enough for a man to discover the depth of his own desire to meet her there. Healing warmth, the gentleness that lets him put down his armor. There are men who have lived inside their own armor for so long that even tenderness can feel unfamiliar against the skin. From the outside, that armor can look like many things: competence, restraint, dry humor, silence, discipline, a preference for facts over feelings, the habit of changing the subject just when a conversation begins to move toward something exposed. Sometimes it looks like strength. Sometimes it looks like indifference. Sometimes it looks like a man who is simply tired and does not have language for the depth of that tiredness. But armor is rarely made from nothing. It is usually made from old necessity. From the years a man learned that softness was expensive. From the moments he was told, directly or indirectly, that tenderness weakened his value. From the quiet humiliations of being misunderstood when he was most open. From the pressure to stay useful when what he needed was comfort. From disappointments he never fully spoke aloud because speaking them would not have changed what was required of him. Over time, many men become fluent in self-protection long before they become fluent in self-revelation. And then they are expected to move through love as if none of that history exists. This is where healing warmth becomes one of the deepest expressions of feminine energy. Not because I am here to rescue a man from himself. Not because it is my task to repair every wound that life, family, work, or past love placed inside him. That would not be intimacy. It would be self-erasure disguised as compassion. Healing warmth is something more grounded than that. It is the quality of presence I bring when I do not punish vulnerability. It is the atmosphere I create when my gentleness is strong enough to hold what is unguarded without trying to control it. There is enormous power in that. Because a man may spend years being admired, desired, even depended on, and still never feel truly safe. He may be wanted for his capability, his steadiness, his provision, his decisiveness. But safety is different. Safety is the feeling that when some hidden part of him appears, it will not immediately be judged, diminished, corrected, or turned against him. That kind of safety can change the structure of a relationship. Daniel and I are still in Seattle, still in the same city of rain and harbor light, still moving through the quiet rooms and weather-softened evenings that seem to draw truth closer to the surface. There is a certain kind of Seattle night that feels almost built for honesty. The windows are dark mirrors. The air carries the smell of wet pavement and cedar. The apartment grows quieter after dinner, and whatever has been held in all day begins to show itself in subtler ways. One night Daniel comes home later than usual. Not dramatically late. Not with a storm around him. He opens the door, sets down his keys, and says all the normal things a man says when he is trying to pass through his own heaviness without letting it touch the room too much. But I can feel immediately that he is carrying more than the hour itself. His voice is flatter. His shoulders have that stillness that is not calm, only fatigue pressed into shape. Even the way he stands in the kitchen tells me he has been bracing all day. This is the kind of moment many women know well. The moment when I can either meet what is true, or make the room harder for both of us. Healing warmth begins in what I do not do. I do not interrogate him the second he walks in. I do not say, "What's wrong with you?" I do not sharpen because his silence makes me uncomfortable. I do not assume his distance is about me. I do not force cheerfulness into the room like a command performance. I do not begin analyzing him before he has even had the chance to hear himself. Instead, I make space. I lower the noise in the room rather than adding to it. I hand him a glass of water. I let him breathe. I stay near without crowding him. My tone remains soft, but not fragile. My body says what words often cannot say at first: you do not have to keep performing strength right this second. That is healing warmth. It is not passive. It is not vague. It is deeply intentional in its restraint. A woman who carries this kind of warmth understands that men often come closer through safety, not pressure. That when a man has lived a long time in self-protection, harshness will not draw him out. Contempt will not draw him out. Emotional demands delivered in the heat of his shutdown will not draw him out. They may produce compliance, explanation, or defense, but not the vulnerable truth that actually creates intimacy. What draws him out is the experience of not being made smaller for being human. Eventually Daniel sits down at the table. The room is dim except for the light over the stove. Rain is moving softly against the windows. I sit across from him, but not in the posture of someone waiting to extract a confession. I simply stay available. After a while, he says something small. Just one sentence about work. Another woman might miss the importance of it because the sentence itself is ordinary. But ordinary sentences often carry extraordinary weight when they are the first crack in a man's armor. So I do not rush past it. I let the sentence matter. I ask one quiet question, and then I stop again. This is another form of healing, not flooding a man the instant he opens an inch. If I pour too much intensity into the first vulnerable moment, he may retreat simply to recover his balance. Gentleness knows how to pace itself. It knows how to let honesty come forward without grabbing it too quickly. Daniel begins to say more. About pressure. About the exhaustion of being the calm one in rooms full of people with less self-control. About how tired he is of carrying things invisibly. About how, some days, he wonders whether anyone would know the difference between him and the role he has learned to play so well. There it is. The private ache beneath the polished surface. And what matters most in that moment is not whether I say something brilliant. It is whether my face changes in a way that makes him regret telling me. Whether I look disappointed by his weariness. Whether I lose respect for his uncertainty. Whether I become impatient with the fact that his pain does not arrive in a neat, emotionally articulate package. Healing warmth refuses that violence. It allows me to hear what is fragile without immediately imposing a verdict on it. That does not mean I become endlessly accommodating or abandon my own truth. Healing warmth is not submission. It is not being so soft that I disappear. It is a kind of emotional steadiness that keeps the room safe enough for what is real to emerge. It lets me stay tender without becoming porous to everything. It lets me care without taking over. This is especially important because many women, by the time they reach the middle of life, are carrying their own exhaustion too. We are not empty vessels waiting to absorb whatever a man cannot hold. We have our own histories, our own grief, our own overused strength. So the gentleness I offer has to come from wholeness, not martyrdom. If it comes from the desperate hope that I can heal him into loving me better, it will rot into resentment. But if it comes from groundedness, from my own inner steadiness, then it becomes one of the most nourishing forms of intimacy two people can share. There is something unforgettable about a woman whose softness does not humiliate a man. A woman who does not use his vulnerable moment as leverage later. A woman who does not mock what he reveals in the language of honesty. A woman whose touch says rest for a moment, not prove yourself again. A woman who can sit beside him in the aftermath of a hard day and make the room feel less like another battlefield. Men remember that. They remember the woman with whom their nervous system stopped clenching for a little while. The woman whose presence did not demand more armor. The woman whose gentleness was not decorative, but deeply inhabitable. The woman who made it possible, even briefly, to step out from behind the role and feel that what remained would still be met with respect. That is healing warmth. It does not fix him. It does something rarer. It gives him one honest place to set down what he has been carrying, and trust that when he reaches for it again, he will not find that his tenderness has been used against him. And for many men, that feeling enters memory more deeply than beauty ever could. Self-respect and boundaries, the feminine energy that does not beg. There is a kind of love that slowly teaches a woman to disappear while calling it patience. It does not happen all at once. That is why it can be so difficult to recognize. It happens in small permissions. The message I do not answer honestly because I do not want to seem difficult. The inconsistency I explain away because I want to be understanding. The hurt I swallow because bringing it up feels exhausting. The standard I lower because I am afraid that if I do not bend, I will lose the connection altogether. Little by little, I begin to trade self-respect for proximity. I remain warm, available, emotionally intelligent, endlessly reasonable. And somewhere in that long performance of grace, I begin to leave myself behind. This is why self-respect is not separate from feminine energy. It is what gives feminine energy its spine. Without it, softness becomes self-erasure. Empathy becomes self-betrayal. Patience becomes permission. Love becomes a place where I am endlessly present for someone else while quietly absent from my own life. And a man can feel the difference between a woman who is open from fullness and a woman who is over-accommodating from fear. At first, the second kind of woman may seem easier to love. She does not press too hard. She asks for little. She explains his moods before he has to. She stays gentle even when she is confused. She keeps the emotional door open long after dignity should have closed it. But what looks easy is not always what creates respect. Sometimes it creates carelessness. Sometimes it teaches a man that access to a woman's heart can remain cheap because she will keep making room for him no matter how inconsistently he shows up. That is not feminine power. That is exhaustion wearing lipstick. Daniel and I are still in Seattle, still inside the same city of rain, ferries, dark windows, and quiet interiors where emotional truth seems to echo more clearly because everything outside is muted. There is something about this city that sharpens my understanding of boundaries. Perhaps it is the weather. The way the sky itself seems to say that not everything must be exposed in order to be real. The way the water holds shape without needing to explain it. Self-respect feels like that to me now. Not loud. Not theatrical. Not defensive. Just clear. There was a season in my life when I believed that being loving meant giving people more chances than they had earned. I mistook my capacity to understand for proof that I should remain. I believed that if I could see the wound beneath the behavior, then I ought to make room for the behavior too. I confused emotional intelligence with endless tolerance. Many women do. Especially women who have spent years being the steadier one, the wiser one, the one who can absorb complexity without collapsing. But understanding someone is not the same as surrendering my boundaries to them. That distinction changes everything. Because when a woman loses her boundaries, she does not only lose protection. She loses clarity. She stops being able to tell the difference between compassion and accommodation, between loyalty and fear, between true patience and the slow normalization of what is hurting her. Her body knows before her mind does. Sleep grows thinner. Anxiety becomes ambient. She checks her phone too often. She rehearses conversations that never quite happen. She becomes less alive in the very connection she keeps trying to preserve. And that is often the first sign that self-respect is asking to return. Self-respect is not cruelty. It is not coldness. It is not punishing people for being imperfect. It is the quiet refusal to keep participating in what steadily diminishes me. It is the moment I stop calling chronic confusion chemistry. The moment I stop romanticizing inconsistency as emotional complexity. The moment I stop making myself endlessly available to someone who only reaches for me when it suits his loneliness, his schedule, or his need for temporary comfort. A woman rooted in self-respect does not need to become hard in order to become clear. That may be one of the most beautiful things about mature feminine energy. I do not need sharp edges to prove I have standards. I do not need a speech, a threat, a performance of detachment. Sometimes all I need is the willingness to let reality mean what it means. If a man is inconsistent, I let inconsistency be information. If he is vague where honesty is required, I let vagueness reveal character. If he reaches for intimacy but resists responsibility, I let that pattern speak for itself. I stop translating everything into a better story because I want the ending to feel safer. That is self-respect. It is deeply feminine because it does not beg. It does not chase. It does not over-explain its worth in the hope that being understood will produce better treatment. It simply stands where it stands and lets another person decide whether he is capable of meeting it. And if he is not, it does not collapse. This is one of the most difficult lessons for many women, especially those who have built identities around loyalty and depth. We are often told that love means staying long enough to prove that we are not shallow, not selfish, not demanding, not impossible to please. But self-respect asks a more unsettling question. What if leaving a situation that dishonors me is not a failure of love, but an expression of it? Not love for him. Love for the life in me. Love for the woman who has spent too many years swallowing her own knowing. Love for the nervous system that can no longer survive on crumbs and ambiguity. Love for the future self who deserves to live in clearer air. Daniel, I think, understands this about me not because I announce it often, but because he can feel it in the way I move. I do not threaten departure as leverage. I do not play games with distance to provoke pursuit. But I also do not abandon myself in order to keep the emotional temperature comfortable. If something matters, I say it. If something does not work for me, I do not soften it into almost nothing. If a line exists, I let it exist. There is dignity in that. A kind of calm self-containment that changes how a man approaches a woman. He senses, often instinctively, that she cannot be handled casually without consequence. Not because she is dramatic, because she is intact. And there is something profoundly magnetic about an intact woman. A woman whose kindness is real, but not available for exploitation. A woman whose tenderness does not erase her standards. A woman who does not need to raise her voice in order to refuse what is beneath her emotional truth. A woman who can understand a man's wounds and still decline his chaos. A woman who can love deeply and still say no. That woman is unforgettable because she makes love feel weightier. Her affection is not automatic. Her access is not cheap. Her warmth has discernment in it. She does not offer herself as a public resource to anyone who is lonely enough to ask. She offers herself where there is reciprocity, sincerity, steadiness, and respect. This also changes how I relate to myself in private. Boundaries are not only about what I allow from others. They are about how I stop violating my own interior life. I stop overriding exhaustion and calling it discipline. I stop revisiting conversations that only reopen old wounds. I stop feeding attention to what unsettles me and then wondering why I feel unwell. I stop making my own peace negotiable. That is self-respect too. It is how I protect the conditions under which my soul can remain warm. Because that warmth matters. Without boundaries, warmth turns brittle. But with boundaries, warmth becomes radiant. It is no longer desperate to be chosen. It is free enough to choose. Free enough to remain open without becoming porous. Free enough to stay soft without surrendering shape. And men feel that freedom. They feel it in the way a woman does not scramble after reassurance. In the way she does not plead with confusion to become clarity. In the way she can step back without theatrics when something dishonors her spirit. In the way she remains tender without becoming available to disrespect. This is the feminine energy that does not beg. It does not need to. Because it already knows that love without self-respect is only another form of abandonment, and it has abandoned itself enough for one lifetime. Wholeness, a woman whose life has warmth even without romance. There is a kind of peace that does not come from being loved. It comes from no longer treating love as the final piece that will rescue me from my own unfinished life. I think this is one of the hardest truths for many women to accept, especially women who have spent years being needed by others. Because when I have poured myself into marriage, motherhood, work, caretaking, loyalty, survival, and the countless invisible labors that hold life together, it is easy to believe that one day love will finally give back what life has taken. That one deep connection will soothe the loneliness. That one right man will restore color to what has grown dim. That romance, if it is real enough, will return me to myself. But it does not work that way. Love can deepen a life. It can warm it, steady it, enrich it. But it cannot become the sole source of warmth without eventually collapsing under the weight of what I am asking it to carry. No man can bear the burden of being my missing center. No relationship can thrive when it is expected to provide all meaning, all joy, all comfort, all identity, all aliveness. That is why wholeness matters so much. Not because I must become perfectly healed before I deserve love. Not because I need to prove that I can live without anyone. Not because longing is weakness. Wholeness is something gentler and deeper than all of that. It is the quiet return of inner life. It is the moment I begin building warmth inside my own days again, even before romance arrives, even if romance changes, even if romance leaves. A whole woman is not a woman who never aches. She is a woman whose life still has a pulse when no one is texting her goodnight. She is a woman who can miss love without collapsing into emptiness. She is a woman who has slowly, sometimes painfully, gathered herself back from all the places she once scattered her worth. Daniel and I are still in Seattle, still under the same gray sky that makes every interior space feel more intimate. There is a kind of honesty this city invites. The rain has a way of removing spectacle. The harbor light, the ferry horns, the windows glowing at dusk, the long quiet evenings that come early in winter, they all make life feel less performative and more essential. In Seattle, warmth is something I can feel in sharper ways because the world outside is often cool, wet, and restrained. A lamp in the corner matters more. A bowl of soup matters more. A slow evening matters more. Small comforts reveal themselves as foundations, not extras. That is how wholeness often begins too. Not in dramatic reinvention. In small recoveries of warmth. For many years, I think women are praised more for devotion than for inner life. We are admired for what we sustain. For how well we endure. For how beautifully we hold everything together while needing very little in return. And then one day life shifts. The children grow older. A marriage changes shape. A divorce settles into fact. Work remains demanding, but no longer answers the deeper ache. The house gets quieter. The evenings lengthen. And suddenly I am face to face with a question I may have postponed for years. What, exactly, makes my life feel alive when no one is actively needing me? That question can feel devastating at first. Because if I have built my identity around being necessary, then spaciousness can feel like loss. Solitude can feel like evidence that something is missing. A free Saturday can feel heavier than a full one because without the noise, I have to meet the truth of my own neglected self. But this is also where wholeness begins. It begins when I stop fleeing that meeting. It begins when I stop treating my own life as a waiting room for love. I think of mornings in Seattle before the city fully wakes. The coffee still hot in my hands. Rain tapping softly against the glass. The room dim and quiet. There is no romance in the room at that hour, no grand declaration, no one looking at me across the table. And yet there can be warmth there if I have learned how to inhabit my own life. A book with dog-eared pages. Music playing low. A candle on the kitchen counter in winter. The slow making of breakfast. The private dignity of caring for a life that is mine, even when no one is applauding it. That kind of life changes a woman. Because when I begin to create beauty, rhythm, and nourishment for myself, I stop approaching love as a rescue mission. I begin to approach it as an invitation. And there is an enormous difference between the two. A man can feel when he is being invited into a life. He can also feel when he is being asked to become one. The first is tender. The second is heavy. Daniel feels this in ways he may never fully say out loud. He senses that when he is with me, he is not standing in the middle of a barren emotional landscape waiting for him to provide all weather, all color, all meaning. He is entering a life that already has inner texture. A woman who has ways of returning to herself. A woman whose days are not empty without him, even if they are warmer with him. A woman who knows how to walk by the water alone, how to make a home feel lived in, how to hold a quiet evening without panicking at its silence, how to keep her spirit fed by things that do not depend entirely on romance. That is deeply magnetic. Not because it is detached. Because it is alive. Wholeness often looks ordinary from the outside. That is part of its beauty. It may be the woman who keeps fresh flowers on the table, not because anyone is coming over, but because she likes the room better that way. The woman who takes a long walk near Puget Sound after a difficult week and lets the cold air clear something in her. The woman who still goes to the art exhibit, the bookstore, the yoga class, the neighborhood cafe, even if she goes alone. The woman who knows how to cook one beautiful meal for herself on a Tuesday and not treat that act as sad. The woman who protects a few friendships that nourish her. The woman who still lets herself be touched by music, literature, weather, scent, prayer, movement, silence. None of this is trivial. It is how a soul stays warm. And warmth matters because without it, women become vulnerable to the wrong kind of love. When my inner life is underfed, I am more likely to mistake intensity for nourishment. More likely to romanticize attention because I am starving for reflection. More likely to hand too much meaning to a man simply because he interrupts my loneliness. But when my life already contains warmth, I become more discerning. I can want him without turning him into medicine. I can love him without asking him to replace my relationship with myself. This makes intimacy cleaner, less frantic, less desperate, more honest. It also makes loss survivable. A whole woman is not untouched by heartbreak. She is not above longing. She is not immune to grief. But when a rupture comes, it does not erase her entire world. Something remains. The rhythms she built. The life she tended. The parts of herself she kept alive outside the relationship. She may hurt deeply, but she is not reduced to nothing. There is still a hearth burning somewhere inside her own life. That is what men remember too. They remember the woman whose joy did not feel performative or borrowed. The woman whose life had atmosphere. The woman who could sit in a quiet Seattle apartment with rain moving down the windows and somehow make that room feel full, not empty. The woman who did not need constant stimulation to feel alive. The woman whose peace was not fake, not forced, not brittle, but earned. Wholeness is not perfection. It is not the absence of loneliness. It is the presence of inner companionship. It is knowing how to stay with myself long enough that my life begins to speak again in its own voice. And once that happens, love is no longer the place where I go to become someone. It becomes the place where two already living souls meet. That is why a whole woman feels unforgettable. Because when a man meets her, he does not feel recruited into a rescue. He feels welcomed into warmth. The quiet power of timing, rhythm, and emotional pace. There is a kind of damage that happens in love when everything is rushed before it has had the chance to become true. Not always obvious damage. Sometimes nothing dramatic goes wrong. The relationship still moves. The conversations still happen. Affection is exchanged, plans are made, feelings are named. And yet somewhere beneath that forward motion, something essential is missing. The rhythm is off. The timing is wrong. Too much is being asked of a moment that has not ripened enough to carry it. I think many women know this feeling, even if they do not always name it that way. The pressure to answer too quickly. The pressure to define too quickly. The pressure to explain what I feel before my feelings have fully settled into their own shape. The pressure to turn a meaningful silence into immediate language because stillness has become so uncomfortable in the modern world. And yet some of the deepest feminine energy lies precisely there in the ability to respect the pace at which truth actually arrives. This is not hesitation born from fear. It is not emotional withholding. It is not manipulation through delay. It is something much more mature than that. It is rhythm. It is the wisdom to know that not everything real appears on command. Some things need a little darkness, a little quiet, a little space around them before they can become clear enough to be spoken without distortion. Daniel and I are still in Seattle, still under the same lowered sky, still moving through a city where weather itself seems to teach patience. Rain does not ask permission there. Fog does not rush to lift. Light arrives slowly through clouds, and evening settles with a kind of quiet finality that makes everything feel more deliberate. Seattle is a city of long pauses. A city that understands atmosphere. A city that knows some truths reveal themselves better when no one is forcing them into brightness too soon. That has always felt deeply connected to love for me. Because love, too, has weather. It has tides. It has mornings where everything feels clear, and evenings where things blur at the edges and need to be left alone until morning. It has conversations that are ready now, and conversations that will only deepen if I wait long enough not to speak from the first layer of emotion, but from the raw one beneath it. This kind of pacing is often mistaken for passivity, especially by people who have been trained to equate urgency with sincerity. But urgency is not always depth. Sometimes urgency is only anxiety with a louder voice. It wants immediate relief, immediate clarity, immediate reassurance, immediate conclusion. It believes that if something matters, it must be resolved now. Yet some of the most important things in love are damaged by being pulled into language before they are ready. A woman with emotional pace understands that. She knows the difference between truth that is ripe and truth that is still reacting. She knows the difference between a pause that protects intimacy and a silence that avoids it. She knows that saying everything immediately is not the same as being honest. Sometimes it is merely being flooded. I have learned this slowly, and not without cost. There were times earlier in life when I thought that emotional maturity meant instant articulation. If something hurt, I believed I should be able to explain it at once. If something shifted in a relationship, I believed it had to be named immediately or it would become dangerous. If I felt uncertainty, I thought the noble thing was to drag it into the light before it had even formed into language. But often, what came out in those moments was not the deepest truth. It was the most immediate one. The sharpest one. The least digested one. And there is a difference. The first truth that rises is not always false. But it is not always complete either. Sometimes it is only the smoke, not the fire. Sometimes it is the wound speaking before wisdom arrives. Sometimes it is loneliness disguising itself as certainty. Sometimes it is fear demanding resolution because sitting in tenderness feels unbearable. Daniel has taught me something about this, though not intentionally. He is not a man who reaches his deepest feelings instantly. He moves more slowly than that. Not because he is shallow, but because he is careful. There are men whose inner life forms in silence before it becomes speech. If I try to force their pace, I do not get more truth. I get less. I get the defensive version, the simplified version, the one shaped quickly enough to stop the pressure. So timing matters. There are evenings in Seattle when we walk near the water and say very little for long stretches. The city glows in fragments across the dark. Ferries move like patient lights through the harbor. The air is cold enough to keep the body awake. Those walks have taught me that connection is not always built through more words. Sometimes it is built through the absence of panic around silence. Through the willingness to let a moment remain open, unfinished, breathing. That kind of openness is rare. Many people cannot tolerate emotional incompletion. They want the conversation finished, the feeling named, the uncertainty sealed shut. But a woman with rhythm understands that unfinished does not always mean unsafe. Sometimes unfinished is simply still becoming. And that changes the quality of intimacy completely. Because when I stop forcing every emotion into immediate expression, I begin to respect process. I let my feelings move through me long enough to discover what they are actually asking for. I stop mistaking reaction for revelation. I stop using another person as the immediate container for every internal tremor. I allow myself time to sense whether I am hurt, tired, triggered, disappointed, frightened, or simply overextended. And when I do speak, the truth comes out cleaner. Softer sometimes. More precise. More rooted in reality and less in the first wave of distress. This is not emotional suppression. It is emotional stewardship. There is something deeply feminine about that kind of pacing. It reminds me of cooking over low heat, of dough rising in a warm kitchen, of rain gathering slowly on a window, of a song that becomes more beautiful because it does not reveal its full melody in the first minute. The best things in life often have tempo. They unfold. They deepen by not being forced. Love is like that too. A woman becomes unforgettable when being with her does not feel frantic. When closeness with her is not a series of emotional emergencies. When there is room inside the relationship for thought, for breath, for the slower truth. She does not create drama out of every shift. She does not demand emotional certainty before life has had the chance to show what is true. She knows how to let longing mature instead of grabbing at it. She knows how to let one good evening simply be one good evening, without trying to wring destiny out of it before the night is over. This is especially important for women in the middle of life, because by now many of us have already learned what rushed intimacy costs. We have seen people confess too much too soon and mistake exposure for safety. We have watched attraction accelerate into attachment before character had time to reveal itself. We have watched ourselves cling to intensity because intensity felt like proof that something meaningful was happening. But intensity is not always intimacy. Sometimes it is simply speed. Rhythm protects me from that confusion. It allows desire to breathe. It allows trust to form in the actual light of lived experience rather than the projection of longing. It allows me to notice who Daniel is not only in charged moments, but in ordinary ones. How he moves through fatigue. How he handles disappointment. How he reaches for me when life is quiet, not just when emotion is heightened. Pace reveals character in a way urgency never can. It also creates safety for tenderness. Not every loving thing needs to be spoken immediately. Sometimes the truest gesture is to wait until the room is softer. To revisit the conversation in the morning when the nervous system has settled. To place a hand over his instead of asking for language he does not yet have. To let an unfinished moment remain unfinished for the night because forcing it closed would be less honest than leaving it gently open. That is a form of wisdom many women grow into only after life has worn down our appetite for unnecessary noise. And men remember it. They remember the woman with whom time felt different. The woman who did not crowd every silence with fear. The woman whose emotional pace made the relationship feel inhabitable instead of demanding. The woman who knew that truth has its own hour, and love cannot be deepened by dragging it prematurely into speech. The woman who understood that some connections are not strengthened by speed, but by reverence. Daniel may never say it in these exact words. But I think he feels it when he is with me, that being near me does not feel like being managed toward an emotional deadline. It feels like being allowed to arrive. And that feeling is more powerful than many women realize. Because in a world that is always rushing to label, respond, react, and conclude, the woman who knows how to keep time with the slower rhythms of the heart becomes almost impossible to forget. Why he sees her as the only choice. In the end, I do not think a man sees a woman as the only choice because she tried harder than everyone else. Not because she was more agreeable. Not because she was more available. Not because she mastered the perfect balance of beauty, softness, mystery, and restraint like some polished performance designed to keep love from wandering. Life is not that mechanical, and the heart is not that obedient. If it were, far more women would feel cherished than they do. What makes a woman unforgettable is rarely the effort she made to be chosen. It is the depth of reality she carried when she stopped performing and simply became fully inhabited. That is what stays. A man may admire many women in the course of a lifetime. He may desire one, be impressed by another, feel comfort with one, excitement with another. But the woman he cannot replace in his memory is often the one whose presence altered something in him at a level that had very little to do with appearances and everything to do with truth. She made him feel more honest, more awake, more seen without being cornered, more calm without being numbed, more drawn in without being manipulated, more human without being diminished. And these things matter far more than most people realize. Because beneath all the noise of modern love, what most people are starved for is not stimulation. It is recognition. Not attention in the shallow sense. Not chemistry that burns hot and disappears. Recognition. The rare experience of being met by another person in a way that does not flatten, rush, consume, or misread what is most essential in me. That is what this kind of woman gives. Not because she is flawless, but because she has substance. And substance changes the emotional atmosphere around her. I think of Daniel, and of Seattle, and of everything quiet that lives between two people when they stop trying to impress each other and begin telling the truth in smaller, more lasting ways. The rain against the windows. The harbor light in the distance. The dim kitchen at the end of a long day. The slow walks near the water. The silence that no longer needs to be filled to prove that something is alive between us. That is where real love often reveals itself. Not in spectacle. In atmosphere. In the feel of being with a woman whose inner life is not chaotic, empty, or performative, but warm, paced, self-respecting, emotionally awake, and deeply real. That kind of woman does not pull a man toward her by force. She draws him in because being near her feels different from the rest of his life. Less noisy. Less false. Less transactional. More inhabitable. And that is why he begins to see her differently from everyone else. Not as the easiest. Not as the most decorative. Not even as the most exciting in the shallow sense. But as the woman with whom something inside him can finally rest and deepen at the same time. That combination is rare. To feel both peace and depth. To feel both desire and trust. To feel both mystery and safety. To feel that a woman is fully herself, and yet there is still more of her soul I may spend years discovering. That is what makes a man stop looking around the room. Not fear. Not pressure. Not performance. Truth. A woman becomes the only choice when she is no longer offering herself as a product to be compared. She becomes the only choice when being with her feels like entering a living world, not consuming a polished image. A world with emotional weather, quiet intelligence, tenderness, dignity, rhythm, and warmth. A world where he is not merely entertained, but changed. I think many women need to hear this because so many have been taught the opposite. They have been taught to compete, to optimize themselves, to become easier, prettier, more strategic, more digestible, to stay emotionally pleasing, to remove every sharp edge, every need, every boundary, every complexity that might make them harder to choose. But the woman who is truly unforgettable is often the woman who stopped shaping herself around that fear. She is not careless with love. She is not indifferent. She is not cold. She simply no longer believes that devotion requires self-erasure. She knows how to be present without disappearing. She knows how to be emotionally alive without becoming chaotic. She knows how to be mysterious without being manipulative. She knows how to be authentic without spilling everything at once. She knows how to receive without making herself helpless. She knows how to be gentle without becoming responsible for healing everyone around her. She knows how to hold self-respect without losing softness. She knows how to build a life that still has warmth, beauty, and pulse even when romance is not standing in the center of it. And perhaps most importantly, she knows how to move at the pace of what is true rather than the pace of what is feared. That woman is not unforgettable because she is trying to win. She is unforgettable because she has come home to herself. And when a woman comes home to herself, love changes shape around her. She stops asking, "What do I need to do so he will stay?" She begins to ask, "What kind of love is worthy of the life I have worked so hard not to abandon?" That is a different question entirely. A more honest one. A more mature one. And for many women between 35 and 60, it is the question that marks the true turning point. Not the end of longing, but the end of begging. Not the end of tenderness, but the end of performing. Not the end of desire, but the end of handing desire more authority than dignity. So if I had to answer the question at the heart of this entire conversation, why he sees her as the only choice, I would say this. Because she makes love feel like truth instead of effort. Because her presence carries peace without emptiness. Because her warmth does not ask him to rescue her. Because her depth does not let him reduce her. Because her self-respect makes her affection mean more, not less. Because her wholeness turns love into an invitation, not a burden. Because in a world full of noise, performance, speed, and emotional confusion, being with her feels like stepping into something real enough to stay for. And maybe that is what so many women are longing for too. Not to be chosen at any cost. But to live in such a way that being chosen is no longer the measure of their worth, only one possible expression of a life already rooted in meaning. If these words found you tonight somewhere in that quiet place between strength and weariness, between competence and longing, between the life you manage and the life you still ache to feel more deeply, let me leave you with the soul of this channel. You're not broken. You're just in the middle. Before you go, I want to ask you one small question. What do you think makes a woman truly unforgettable to a man? A. Her emotional depth and inner peace. B. Her mystery and the way she cannot be easily replaced. Comment A or B below. And if you see it differently, share your view in the comments too, so other women here can read your thoughts and feel less alone in their own. Then subscribe to the channel to support this space and help me keep creating the next thoughtful videos for women who are still standing, still carrying so much, and still searching for what is true.